And that was Pink Pantheress, and a review of a very late review, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, the latest Marvel reboot. Well, it's not a reboot; it's another character from the Marvel comic book universe. And as we're seeing with Eternals, these characters are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Got really good reviews, mainly for its portrayal of Asian culture. So this is Destin Daniel Cretton's, not doing that. Yeah, Cretton is directing, but he's not really done anything major before this. It stars one of the most acclaimed actors in Asian cinema, Tony Leung, who is a masterful actor in his 20 or 30 years career, probably 30 years. He's really not been best on screen or equal best on screen in too many films to even name. He's one of the great actors, I feel, of the last 30 years. He stars here as a guy who in ancient antiquity comes across the all-powerful 10 rings. He wears them on his wrists, and it gives him immortality and enormous power, and he isn't portrayed as a good man. He's portrayed as somebody that conquers everyone around him. It moves through a few thousand years to the modern era, where he discovers in the 1990s that there's this incredible magical village which he wants to basically plunder, and he can't find it. He tries to, and there's a woman in it who plays his wife. I'm not sure. Fala Chen as Ying Li. She guards this village, and he's all-powerful and no one can defeat him, but he's got no truck with her at all. She manages to make short shift of him, and he falls in love with her. And they end up becoming a married couple, and he gives up the 10 rings and has a child, 2 children, and backs away from his previous life of pretty bad dictatorial behaviour in conquering the world, but his past comes back to bite him, leading to the death of his wife. Now, the children have long since vanished into the ether, and we join things in the modern era with Simu Liu as Shang-Chi, the main character. He's a busboy with Aquafina, parking rich people's cars in America. And due to some unhealthy altercations with villains, we find out actually he's this son of the holder of the 10 rings and has enormous fighting abilities and powers, much to his friend Aquafina's shock. And he then realizes that something's happening back in the homeland. He's been estranged from his father for many years after his father sent him out to do a hit. And he never sort of forgave him or came back, and he's just been living a secret life. But things catch up with him too, and also his sister, who's that? Menge Zhang, who's Zhu Zilang. It's his younger sister who he abandoned to take up this secret life, and she's left behind in China and runs a fighting ring, basically. And they're both highly trained because of her father. Their father trained them from childhood to become these assassins and so on. And the father then comes back into the fold as he's kind of revealed to be the guy that's guiding it all. And he thinks he can find their dead mother. And that's where the rest of the film progresses from. It's an overrated film again. I think what happens with Marvel films is if you put a woman in the lead role or somebody who isn't white in the lead role, critics fall over themselves for the films and don't really judge them. I'll be honest, I thought the first half of this was surprisingly good. Very colourful, action-packed, lots of fighting, fist-fighting sort of stuff. Really, really well done. I thought that Aquafina and Simu Liu were very good in their respective roles, if a tad perfunctory. I thought that they were very amiable characters, and I did like the whole sort of Asian culture aspect of the film as well. I think the masterstroke here was the 2 early 2000s alumni of some of the most prominent Southeast Asian films ever, which is Michelle Yeoh, not Maggie Chung. Michelle Yeoh comes in halfway stage, and obviously one of the most prominent actors from that era in some of the most prominent, often Oscar-nominated Asian films, and Tony Leung is the masterstroke. He's so good in his role as this not very nice and very complex man. As he's not quite the villain, and I understand what he's doing isn't really that evil, but he's a misguided man. But he's also been quite evil as well. Brilliant characterization from Tony Leung. He brings all the gravity to the table. He is by far the best thing on screen. Where things go a bit awry for me is the second half of this film. I thought it was building really, really well. I kind of thought it was the law of diminishing returns as we progressed into this magical kingdom and it all became a big Technicolor battle where it got a tiny bit silly. And it didn't sort of have as much of an emotional impact as I'd hoped it was from the setup, from Tony Leung and his dad and everything. It was all it felt low stakes a little bit. It is certainly a very engaging and amiable film. And everyone's reason, Ben Kingsley comes back as the Mandarin from Iron Man 3. And again, sometimes he's good and sometimes I found him a bit cringe, to be honest. So I was in two minds. I thought, this is really actually surprisingly a very good film. But then it kind of started petering out and running on empty, and I didn't think the characters were, that interesting by the end. They were certainly interesting when they were sort of goofing around in the first half of the film, but it all became a bit like an episode of Xena, Princess Warrior, which some people might think is an enormous compliment, but a little bit low stakes. I thought that it could have offered more as it progressed towards its climax. It was a bit rote by that point. So it's a bit of a late review, but I'm going to give Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which has got a ridiculous 90-odd% on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm going to say 6.5 out of 10. I kind of felt the same about Captain Marvel and Black Panther, to be honest. I think that they tend to overrate these films because they're not, white Anglo-Saxon straight men playing the superhero, and they lose their chips. But it's a middling effort from Marvel, 6.5 out of 10.